in at least most westernized first world societies, you could say like most of the modern world, it seems like we're brought up, we're raised to be encouraged to have an opinion on every single topic. As if you don't have a voice on a topic, it's as if that makes you weak or indecisive. Like, no, you need to get your voice in there on every single topic. It seems, at least anecdotally to me, that we are raised in this fashion. And we're raised in this way because, much of the modernized democratic world values freedom of speech, and rightfully so. Freedom of speech has tons of advantages. I mean, it allows us to, first of all, point out and critique a lot of negative aspects of topics or states of affairs that need to be improved, right? Whether it's self-improvement or collective improvement. Second of all, it also helps us to do a lot of positive things. So not just critiquing negative things and being all nitpicky, but it also allows us to come together in unity and really interact with and collaborate with each other and build off each other's work, right? Freedom of speech allows us to speak about somebody else's work and speak with that person themselves so that we can basically build off of the foundation that they've laid out. That is how we come together and collectively advance ourselves. So, of course, freedom of speech is extremely radically valuable. But unfortunately, in much of the modernized world, it seems like sometimes we tend to value the speech aspect more than the freedom aspect. What I mean by that is, yes, freedom obviously is great. Freedom of speech allows us to collaborate and interact with each other and improve ourselves in all these ways. But half of interacting with each other is not speech, it's listening. So freedom of speech is valuable, but a lot of times we focus so heavily on the speech aspect of that value that we forget about the listening aspect. Furthermore, this seems to oftentimes get tied in with another bias that a lot of society seems to have. Again, at least just anecdotally to me, it seems to. And that is that society tends to have a bias towards knowing and against not knowing. We tend to look at people who appear to know things confidently. We tend to see them as somebody who, knows what they want, knows how to get what they need, knows what they're talking about, right? They're very confident. It's almost like confidence, it almost shrouds this aura over people, where if somebody is confident and appears to know what they're talking about, it makes most people much more likely to listen to them. Rather than a person demonstrating to you how they know what they know, it's the confidence that tends to win people over, when really it would be better if people looked deeper into it, if they really introspected more deeply and asked, okay, how does this person know what they know? If they really sort of just dig deeper in that way. But a lot of times people don't do that. They don't ask how the person knows what they know. They just look at a person who confidently appears to know what they know. And that confidence and that aura of that state of knowing wins a lot of people over. And opposite to that, we tend to look at people who say, oh, I don't know this, I don't know that. Like people who admit when they don't know something, we tend to view those people as indecisive. Like, oh, they can't make up their minds, they don't have any opinions, they don't stand their ground. That's a phrase we hear a lot. You have to find values on which to stand your ground. And standing your ground is good, but you also need the opposite. You also need to be flexible. Rigidity is great, but so is flexibility. So standing your ground shouldn't be like an absolute, right? You should be able to stand your ground on some things, have an opinion on some things, but not on everything. We're often encouraged to have an opinion on every single topic and to stand our ground with regards to those opinions. And again, that is a bias towards knowing and against not knowing. We view not knowing as indecisive and weak and a disability or inability to stand your ground. And notice we have such a heavy bias against not knowing that we don't really have many words to label that phenomenon that aren't negative. So like not knowing, that's a negative. You take the negative term not and apply it to knowing, right? You negate knowing. That's what not knowing means. So not knowing is a negative term. What's another word we have for it? Ignorance. Ignorance has a negative connotation, right? It sounds like an insult to say that somebody's ignorant. We have a lot of words like that which we ascribe to this phenomenon of not knowing, and then we have a lot of positive terms which we ascribe to knowing. This linguistic outcome just seems to reflect which way we tend to lean collectively. Right? But really, not knowing can be just as positive as knowing. I mean, if you want one example, I guess look at a lot of the crazy stuff I talk about here on my channel. Notice how much it sort of shatters boundaries and leaves you in this place of, well, do I know this topic or don't I, right? Kind of like in the last video I talked about infinity. It's like, okay, well, if infinity is boundless, then it should be so boundless that it's not even bounded to boundlessness itself. So can you really say it's boundless? Because it should also be bounded. It should be things that are neither boundless nor bounded. It should be ineffable things that are none of those, right? It should sort of just explode on and on and on and be essentially ungraspable and even unpointable, right? Like to the extent where it's like, even if you can fully grasp it, you can't point at it, let alone grasp it, right? Like sort of there's a contradiction there. So see, if you really shatter all these boundaries and all these anchors in that way, it's like, what do you say of a given subject? What do you say of it? What do you say of boundlessness? Do you say it's boundless? Well, that seems inadequate now. We might as well just start barking at the wall, because that would be just as correct as saying it's boundless. So it's like language becomes useless, and so knowing becomes useless. So what do you know? What don't you know, right? It kind of just leaves you in that darkness, but it's a healthy darkness, right? It's a healthy not knowing because it opens your mind. So notice how broad and how open not knowing can be. It's very exciting. It's very diverse. There's a lot of room for exploration, like all the crazy contradictory topics I like to talk about. But even more than the topics I talk about, it leaves room for exciting endeavors in other subjects as well. Because if you just don't know something, that opens up a bunch of floodgates of possibilities. There's so much there to explore. Don't you see how that's positive? But see, our society in general tends to not view not knowing in that sort of positive, explosive, broad openness, where it's like it's all these exciting and diverse possibilities, or not just possibilities, but actualities, right? There's so much there to dig into beyond mere possibilities. What about actualities? What about non-possibilities? What about there being no possibilities at all? Like, again, all that contradictory stuff. It really opens you up, and that gets very, very, very colorful very, very fast. It gets very enjoyable, very aesthetic, very beautiful. You see how positive that is. But no, we tend to use more negative terms for not knowing, such as not knowing itself, or ignorance, or things like that, while we ascribe positive terms to states of knowing. When really both can be just as positive or just as negative as each other. Knowing can close many doors. Obviously, knowing is great, right? To know something, to have certainty about it and expertise. This is obviously extremely helpful. I mean, we wouldn't have our modern society without knowing, right? You need people who have, high degrees of expertise in their given fields. So obviously you need knowing. Obviously it's great. But also, it can get you sort of trapped in certain mindsets where you may not be so willing to entertain external possibilities or other stuff as well. So same thing with not knowing. Okay, sure, yeah, there are negative aspects to it, obviously. But as a society, we tend to overemphasize the negatives without really giving credit to the positives of not knowing, the broad, exciting openness that it provides. And it's important to be able to see this value in not knowing so that we are able to see more value in listening, right? See, if we have more of an emphasized bias towards knowing, that's going to lead us to have more of an emphasis on speech, right? Like appearing to know something, confidently speaking about a topic. That's where the freedom of speech comes in, right? But without enough emphasis on the listening aspect that also comes with interacting with each other. You have listening and speech, and it's best to listen before you speak. So freedom of speech is great. It's obviously like a radically valuable thing to encourage in people. But we need more emphasis on the listening aspect, because otherwise freedom of speech actually kind of loses its value. How is freedom of speech valuable in the sort of collaborative sense that I've pointed out if you don't listen to other people first? Earlier in this video, I pointed out how freedom of speech is very valuable because it allows us to come together in unity and collaborate with each other and build off each other's ideas and collectively advance in that way. But how can you build off another's ideas if you don't understand their ideas first? You need to listen first. Then, once you've listened fully, formulate an opinion, have an opinion, and use your freedom of speech to speak, right? You listen before you speak. And not just listen, you need to listen to such an extent that you're able to repeat the topic back to the other person to their full satisfaction. That's how you know that you've actually understood the other person. If you can repeat what they're trying to tell you back to them to their fullest satisfaction. This takes a lot of patience, obviously, but it's worth it. I myself try to do this in every conversation I'm in, whether it's a very irrelevant conversation where there's more casual stuff being talked about and not a lot there that's important, or especially in more crucial conversations. I really try to understand somebody's point to the extent that I can repeat it back to them in my own words, not just like be like a robot and recite it, but like deliver it back to them as if I'm them, right? You see, that's the sort of unity there. You deliver it back to them as if you're behind their eyes rather than yours. There's a sort of oneness there. You should be able to understand something and cite something as if you are behind their eyes rather than yours. And if you do that to the other person's fullest satisfaction, you have indeed understood what they have said. Now you can build off their work. I honestly don't run into hardly any people who do this, though. I have a lot of people who I talk to, and they'll immediately offer an opinion about something I say, and it's like they haven't even understood it. This happens a lot, like a lot, even with my own family, especially the more complicated, in-depth, mystical topics. I'll talk to lots of people about them, and they'll feel for some reason like they need to offer their take on it. When That's not why I share this stuff. I'm not sharing it to force you to offer an opinion. I'm sharing it so that you can understand it, and then if you find something beneficial there in the understanding, then you can build off of it. It's not like you need to be forced to have an opinion. But I run into this so much where people will really rack their brains. Like I'll literally sit there talking to a person and they'll literally make this face for minutes, like like the thinking hard face, like they'll lean up against a wall, like, and like really, it almost is strange to me. Like it looks like they're forcing themselves to search for an opinion, and it's like it's okay. You don't have to offer an opinion on what I'm saying, right? I mean, you don't even have to be interested in it. If you don't want to hear what I'm talking about, that's fine. Say you don't want to talk about it. Say if you do want to talk about it but you don't understand it, that's okay. Tell me what you don't understand. I mean, there's lots of subjects I admit I don't understand. So we shouldn't be afraid to appear weak for admittance of not understanding something, right? We should not be afraid of not knowing. We should not view it as a negative. It is just as positive. If you admit you don't know something, again, think of all the broad floodgates that open up. It is just as colorful and just as positive and just as powerful as knowing, or at least it can be if it's applied correctly. In fact, it can be more powerful in certain cases, right? It can be less powerful, just as powerful, or more powerful, depending on the case or where it's being applied. So don't think that not knowing is like inherently negative and that it's something to run away from or that you should feel forced to share an opinion on a topic. This is especially true with regards to political discussions. I notice in almost every political discussion, not just with politicians, but with family members and friends, that lots of people will have an extremely strong opinion about something, and yet I'll hear their opinion and it's clear to me that they don't fully understand the topic yet. And now, does that mean that I don't like their opinion? No. Like, what I normally say to people is, look, I encourage you to go read up more on the subject that you're talking about. And if you come out with the same opinion that you have right now, that's fine. At least your opinion will be more informed. See, I don't care what your opinion is. All I care is that it is informed. Right? That's all I care about. So it is not that the opinion itself is the problem. It's not the what, it's the how. It's how you've arrived at that opinion. Have you gotten to that opinion after fully listening? Again, did you listen before you spoke? Lots of people don't listen fully before speaking. They cannot cite the topic back to full satisfaction. You need to be able to do that before you can really have a fully informed opinion. There's nothing wrong with just saying you don't have an opinion yet. I say this a lot in a conversation. If somebody asks me, what's your opinion about this? I'll say, I don't know. I haven't researched it heavily enough. And that almost feels like a conversation stopper to a lot of people because it's like, oh, well, that's kind of a dud. But again, that shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't feel like a dud. Not knowing should not feel like a negative. Like if you stop a conversation with, I don't know, I need to research that more heavily, that opens up a ton of space for a bunch of collaboration. That's not a negative. It's not a dud. That's an explosion. There's an explosion of space for collaboration now. Because if I admit I don't know something or you admit you don't know something, now you can tell me what your thoughts on it are and why you think that, right? Maybe you inform me about things I didn't know about the topic, or vice versa. I do the same with you. You see? So if we could just get over this hurdle as a society, a lot of our problems with regards to misinformation especially would be solved. I'm not going to say it would solve everything. It's not like a 100% foolproof solution, but misinformation would greatly decrease in our society. At least here in the US, we have a huge misinformation problem right now. If you can't tell, I mean, we basically have half the US living in one universe and the other half living in another. I imagine it's somewhat the same in other parts of the world, at least in first world countries. I know some political parties and the gaps between them are widening. at least in like some European countries, for example. So maybe you know what I'm talking about internationally as well. But really, we would solve so much of that if we could just value not knowing like how we value knowing. If we could value listening just as much as we value the speech aspect of freedom of speech. That goes with collaboration. So it's really something to practice. It is something that does kind of have to be mastered and something that has to be upheld over time, but it is definitely worth it if you can find out how to do that consistently. And it's easier to actually have productive conversations rather than just arguments and debates back and forth where nothing changes at all. You know, I've had lots of opinions change drastically over the years due to conversations like this, due to me applying this sort of practice to politics, to science, even to other subjects as well. I mean, hell, even to metaphysics, even though that tends to be more of my wheelhouse, so to speak. But yeah, it's something you'll appreciate once you really see the effects that it can have. And honestly, the ironic thing is people value knowing over not knowing because, of course, we like to appear smarter, right? That's not a bad thing. That's normal, right? It's good to be intelligent, so we like to appear more intelligent. But ironically, you'll be 10 times smarter if you know the difference between what you know and what you don't know. If you know where the cliff edge is and where the topics you know end and the topics you don't know begin, just by knowing where that cliff edge is, you will already be 10 times smarter than virtually everybody. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I've ran into hardly any people who are able to do that. It's so hard to know where that boundary is, to know where the things you know end and where the things you don't know begins. If you can know where that is, if you can introspect, meditate on yourself, and find out where that is within yourself, you will already be far more intelligent than everybody. So ironically, even if your goal is to appear more intelligent, you still need to embrace not knowing. You still need to embrace this admittance of what you don't quite understand yet. If you can admit that and know where that begins as a boundary, that in of itself will make you more intelligent than virtually everybody. See, a genius is not just somebody who knows a lot of things. It's somebody who knows the difference between what they know and what they don't. So really try and cultivate that. And this is something that I try to hold myself to as well. It's something we should all try to hold ourselves to. Value it on all sides. And don't be afraid to appear weak at that admittance, because it's not weak, it's strong, it's powerful. See, it's bold, it's daring. It's real confidence. You know, somebody who appears to know something, that's fake confidence. But if you can admit that you don't quite understand something yet, that's real confidence. That takes real courage to admit that. So really try and cultivate that more within yourself and see where it leads. But with all that out of the way, along those lines, I will start uploading some videos to the website, and I will provide the link down below to that again in future videos, talking about various things that, well, I know and don't know. So hopefully you like a lot of those videos to come. Let me know if you have any questions about anything I discussed in this one, and if not, I'll see you all next time. Create a nice day.